Hey, this is Mike Robbins. Thanks so much for joining me for this episode of the podcast. I hope you're doing well, you, your family, your team, everyone around you. As I'm recording this, we're rolling into the July 4th weekend here in the US, and I've been thinking a bit about freedom, but not freedom in the sense of the country and independence and the American Revolution, but more freedom in the sense of emotional freedom. And in this episode, I want to talk specifically about some things that we can do to have an even greater sense of emotional freedom. And I was talking to my counselor, Eleanor, who I've been working with for over a decade now, in our last session. And I said to her towards the end of the session, so what can I do with some of this anger and sadness and fear that I'm feeling right now? And Eleanor and I have talked about different techniques for dealing with different emotions over the years. And she said, well, here are some things you can do. And we talked through that. And then she said, remember, Mike, though, it's not about the specific things that you think are causing you to feel angry or sad or scared. And I said, oh, you mean you're saying, feel the feeling, drop the story, which is something she says to me often. And she said, yeah. And I was like, okay, thanks for the reminder. I was a little annoyed, but grateful to be reminded. So that's what I want to talk about here today is how can we feel our feelings authentically but drop the story. Because I think, look, it's not that the stories that we tell or the stories of what's going on in our lives aren't important. They are. Look, there's a lot of really important stories in my life right now, just like your life, stories about work, stories about family, stories about what's happening in the country and the world. And when I say stories, I mean, like, what's your personal narrative about what's going on right now? And when we sit to talk to a counselor, and I've, had many great counselors over the years, like Eleanor, and lots of therapists and coaches and people that I've worked with, or mentors, or mastermind groups, or my men's group, or other people, I'm often, like you, telling the story of my life. When I get up to speak on stage, which I'll be doing many times later this month and throughout the year, which I love to do and I've been doing for the last 25 years, I'm often telling stories of my life, of what I've learned, of what I've seen, of things that I've read and studied. So stories are powerful. However, we get so obsessed with the story, we sometimes forget it's really about the emotion, right? As you've heard me use this analogy before, but I'll use it again here because it fits really nicely, right? If I had an orange in my hand and I squeezed the orange, what would come out of it? Juice. If I handed it to you and you squeezed it, what would come out of it? Juice. If we handed it to some other person, whether we know that person or not, and they squeezed it, what would come out of it? Juice, right? It doesn't matter if we squeeze it with our hand, if we throw it on the floor, step on it with our foot, put it in a juicer. What's going to come out of the orange is juice because that's what's inside the orange, right? It doesn't matter who squeezes it, how it's squeezed, that's what's in there. You and I are like oranges in terms of our emotions. What's inside of us are emotions, joy and sadness, gratitude, fear, happiness, anger, peacefulness, guilt, you name it, the whole range of emotions, right? And life happens. Our significant other says something, our boss says something, our client or customer says something, our daughter or son does something, our in-laws invite us to whatever, life happens, the world happens. Things in the world happen, significant things. The economy goes up, it goes down, the company reorganizes and our job changes and life happens. We have a health situation. Um, the weather does something. Well, I mean, life happens, right? Big things, small things, and some juice comes out of us. We have some joy or some excitement because something quote unquote wonderful happens. We have some anger or some sadness or some disappointment because something quote unquote negative happens. And again, I'm not trying to sugarcoat or minimize life, but the thing is, we get obsessed with the thing and we forget, oh, wait a minute, that juice is inside of me, right? This thing happens in the world. This thing happens in the company. This thing happens in my community. This thing happens in my family. This thing happens in my relationship with someone who's important to me. This thing happens with my body and my health. And then I have an emotional reaction to it, which may be completely understandable, right? If you lose your job, it would make sense that you would feel some sense of sadness or fear or embarrassment or anger or, right? If you got a new job or got a promotion, it would make sense that you would feel some excitement or some gratitude or some joy or fulfillment or maybe some fear or pressure or whatever, right? Like whatever the emotional reaction, most of the time our emotional reactions make sense. They're understandable. Sometimes they can be a bit irrational and we don't understand, like, why am I feeling this way? Sometimes, like, have you ever had something really good happen? And then instead of feeling the joy and the excitement and the contentment and the healthy pride, you feel scared and disappointed or whatever. Like that can sometimes be weird. Like, why do I feel that way? So, understanding our emotions is one thing, being curious about them, being self reflective, but ultimately it's about feeling them. And as Eleanor has taught me over the years, and before Eleanor, I worked with another great counselor named Chris, who I actually interviewed here on the podcast. And I've had so many different teachers and people in my life who've taught me about so many things. But I've learned to look at emotions in a way that often isn't the conventional way that we look at emotions. Again, we tend to think of emotions, the positive ones being joy and gratitude and love and happiness and contentment and peacefulness, and right. And I love those emotions. Those are some of my favorites, right? And the negative ones we think of as anger and sadness and hurt and jealousy and shame and guilt and rage, right? Helplessness, hopelessness, powerlessness, all these, right? Ooh, I don't particularly love most of those emotions myself. However, emotions can be and are really powerful and healthy when we feel them authentically. They become negative and problematic when we avoid them, when we don't feel them. And yeah, in my experience, it's much more fun to feel gratitude and joy and peace and love than it is to feel sadness and anger and guilt and fear. However, we've all had experiences in life, if you think about this, where a quote unquote negative emotion has been really powerful and important for us to feel and actually been the catalyst for something, right? Have you ever had a good cry about something that was really sad or painful or challenging? And in the crying, it opened you up to a deeper level of awareness or truth or compassion or understanding or connection with other humans, or, right? Have you ever gotten angry about something and it motivated you to take some action or do something or say something or speak up? Have you ever felt hurt, like really hurt, and been able to then tend to that hurt and really care for yourself, or maybe share it with another person, or maybe even the person or people that created the hurt, and it healed something, it connected you with something, right? Or you had some disappointment or some regret, and the regret caused you to then go apologize and make amends, or the disappointment caused you to go ask for someone to apologize to you, or you got to a deeper level of truth or connection. So we all have lots of very practical experiences of negative, quote unquote, negative emotions leading to really positive outcomes. And then on the flip side, you think of positive emotions. Have you ever really loved someone or cared about someone or been grateful for someone? You've been scared to tell them that or share it because it felt too vulnerable or weird, or what if I put myself out there and they thought it was strange, or they thought that I had different intentions, or whatever. Or you really love to do something, but you decide, oh, that's irresponsible, or I can't do that thing. So you end up not doing it, not expressing that love or that joy or experiencing that. And again, so it's the lack of or the inability to feel that emotion. Look, one of the most vulnerable emotions to feel is joy, right? Because then we have the fear of what if it goes away, or what if it's fleeting, right? If you ever have a time in life when things are going really, really well, and maybe that's true right now, and if so, bravo, it can be often unsettling in a weird way, vulnerable in a strange way, like, oh, things are too good. It's like we're waiting for the other shoe to drop, right? And even if you're an optimist, even if you're not someone who's like constantly worried and wringing your hands, like there's something about that takes a lot of courage to really just feel our joy, our gratitude, our love, our appreciation. But what if we had more freedom with the whole range of emotions? You know, Brene Brown talks a lot about this. She wrote about it in her book, I think it's called Atlas of the Heart, where she talked a lot about understanding different emotions and having more emotional awareness, emotional literacy, right? But she talks about this idea, and there's a lot of research to back this up, that we can't selectively mute emotions. Meaning, if I say, I'm not going to feel anger, I'm not going to feel jealousy, I'm not going to feel regret, I'm not going to feel whatever, fill in the blank, shame, what that does is then mute across the spectrum. My capacity for feeling joy and love and peace becomes muted because I say, ooh, I don't like that emotion, or that's not an appropriate emotion. And look, in the world in which we live, again, there's a lot of rules, unwritten rules about what emotions are appropriate or not appropriate at work, in life, based on our gender or our age or our race or our background or our position or all kinds of things, right? There's like a handful of acceptable emotions for the most part, like a little bit of fear, a little bit of anger, some joy, some happiness, some gratitude. But again, it's all relatively muted. And it's like we're not supposed to, quote unquote, feel these emotions, which of course we all do. But it's even like, think about grief and how weird we get when we're grieving, when other people are grieving, the strange things that people do and say when we've lost someone close. And having lost both of my parents and my sister and a mentor and some good friends and, grandparents and other, I mean, I've had quite a bit of loss in my life in terms of people who've died. And as I've talked about here on the show and I've written about, those experiences of grief have been incredibly painful for me, but also incredibly healing and growth inducing and remarkable in so many ways. Like, I didn't want my sister to die or my parents to die. And when they did, so many emotions came up. Some of the emotions I was comfortable feeling, others were more challenging to feel. But what I noticed is, in those intense experiences of grief, when I was able to actually lean into and really feel the emotion, not only did it liberate me to a degree, give me some freedom, but it opened up all of these different doors and pathways within myself to feel things and see things and understand things and heal things that I didn't even know were possible. But it's predicated on our willingness and ability to actually feel our emotions. So, what can we do? How can we have more emotional freedom, more emotional capacity, if you will? And what's ultimately the benefit of it? Well, here's some things that we can do. First and foremost, it's important, I think, to pay attention to, how do I feel about certain feelings? What's my relationship to them? How do I feel about love? How do I feel about fear? How do I feel about gratitude? How do I feel about anger? Because again, we have a lot of stories and judgments about certain emotions. Again, some are good, some are bad, some I like, some I don't. And again, that all makes sense. But what if we could let go of our judgments about the emotions and just feel them? Look, if you and I were hanging out and I went into the other room and I came back into the room that we were and I jumped out from behind the door and I went, boo, you would have an involuntary reaction of fear, right? If I startled you. And then you might be pissed at me for doing that and annoyed, like, why did you do that? You stressed me out, right? But you couldn't control whether you had that reaction. It would just happen. It's involuntary. It's like sneezing, right? It's like it just happens. What if our emotions were like that to some degree? What if we didn't judge them or repress them or hold them back? We just let them be. Now, I'm not talking about running around throwing temper tantrums and no. I mean, I think though sometimes in the guise of kind of managing our emotions, what we do is we suppress them. But oftentimes it doesn't, you don't have to feel an emotion for days and weeks and months and years to actually feel it. It's literally like sometimes 10 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds, 60 seconds, and 90 seconds of really intensely feeling an emotion, and you can move through it. Again, like when we cry, maybe you're someone who cries easily, maybe not, but oftentimes we get moved to tears, which is, by the way, physiologically so natural, so normal, so healthy. And for me, sometimes it's hard to cry. I like doing things that will initiate some crying for me. I often cry at movies, especially on airplanes, but I love that. I cry watching TV shows. My Samantha and Rosie, our daughters, are always making fun of me. Like a commercial will come on, Dad, are you crying again? And I appreciate that I can actually allow myself to get moved to tears watching something, which sometimes in life, just tapping into my own emotional state or what's going on for me, it takes something for me to kind of break through whatever that barrier is that stops me from crying. That's my personal experience. So I don't know what yours is, but again, wherever you are on the continuum, if you cry easily or it's very difficult for you to cry, think about when you do cry, even if it's not something that happens that often. Doesn't it usually feel good and liberating? Now, I know sometimes people say, oh, I cry all the time, or it's embarrassing, or I don't like it, but that's our story about it. That's our reaction to it. And the whole thing about feeling our feelings and dropping the story, again, we often think, I'm angry because my son did this, or I'm scared because of this thing I read online, Or right, and that may be true. Maybe that thing you read did instigate a feeling of fear in you. Maybe your son doing the thing that he did piss you off and create some anger in you. And again, the anger's inside of you, the fear's inside of you, just like the excitement. You may have a trip coming up. We've got a trip coming up later this summer that I'm very excited about. And I really think the excitement is because of the trip. And yeah, that's the thing that's instigating it. But ultimately, my excitement, that's inside of me, right? I think was it Ben Franklin? Someone said joy doesn't exist in the world, it exists in us. So yeah, taking a trip to a location that you love or eating some food that's really delicious to you or watching some movie that you think is funny or inspiring or whatever, those can all be pleasurable experiences, but ultimately the feelings that come about from that pleasurable experience, they exist inside of you. So how do you cultivate them? Right? A lot of it is a deeper emotional awareness, a deeper emotional aperture, more freedom around our emotions, and not tying them to the stories or the circumstances or the situations, right? Like, I can't be happy because of the state of the world. Now, look, the state of the world may be concerning to you, as it is to me, significantly. But if I tie my happiness to the state of the world, there always are going to be things I could find happening in the world to be upset about or concerned about or worried about. And then I'm just going to be miserable all the time, right? You're only as happy as your least happy kid, right? We've all heard that saying. If you have children, there is a lot of truth to that. It's hard to be happy if one of your kids is struggling, especially if one of them may be in crisis. That's very difficult, as I know from personal experience. However, if I tie my happiness to the well being of my children, now ours happen to be 19 and 16, so there's a lot going on for them, as you can imagine, in that stage of life. But whether you have babies or toddlers or school age kids or teenagers like we do, or young adults or much older, and maybe you don't have children, but there's key people in your life. If we tie our own happiness to other people's, it's tricky, right? And I'm not saying we don't love and care about the people in our life. I'm not saying it's not normal and natural and understandable to worry about them if they're struggling or be happy if they're doing well. But again, feel the feeling, drop the story. So come back into what can we do? Pay attention to, again, what are not only the stories happening in my life, but what are my stories about emotions specifically? Which ones do I feel safe to feel? Which ones don't I feel safe to feel? Which ones do I feel like are good and positive and okay to feel? Which ones do I have judgments about? That's the first step in the process. The second thing we can do is start noticing our language around emotions. Again, I use this example often. Maybe you've heard me talk about this, but we often say, "Hey, how you doing? How's it going?" Right? Some version of that question, and it changes, it varies culturally where you live in the country or the world. But usually our response to that, how are you doing, is to then make a judgmental assessment of, I'm good, I'm fine, I'm stressed, Now, again, getting into stressed or worried or upset, now we're starting to get a little bit more into our emotional state. I try when I'm present and aware, I don't always do this, but when someone asks me how I'm doing, they're not specifically asking me how I'm feeling, which is a better question, by the way. How you feeling? But to really see, can I respond in emotional language? I'm feeling excited and nervous, or I'm feeling joyful and hopeful, or I'm feeling tired and curious, or whatever. But like, there's so many, again, Brene Brown's book, Atlas of the Heart, has all these different, she kind of breaks down all these different emotions. I did an incredible program years ago called the Hoffman Process, and they really focused a lot on inviting us to really speak in emotional language. How are you actually feeling? And we had a workbook, and on the back of the workbook, it had a list of like 100 different emotions. That it was like, if you're not sure, look at the list and see if you can pick one or two or three that actually encapsulate how you're feeling in this moment. Because also the thing about emotions is it's a present moment experience. So when you say I'm good or I'm bad, that's actually not a feeling, right? That's a judgment and an assessment. But are you ever really good or really bad? Like, what does that even mean? But if we can say, I'm feeling hopeful and encouraged or excited and nervous, a lot of times I have lots of mixed emotions all at the same time. I mean, I get up to speak and I'm excited and nervous almost every time. I record one of these podcasts and I feel like some joy and some excitement usually that I'm getting to talk to you, but then some fear of like, what the hell am I going to say and how's it going to go? And, you know, what do I look like now that I'm doing it on video? And what's it going to sound like? And who's going to listen to it? And am I making any sense? And how long is it? And, I mean, all these things, I mean, a lot of those are thoughts, but it's again, the feeling is often excitement and curiosity and joy coupled with some fear and some judgment and some trepidation all at the same time, right? So the first thing is, what are our stories about the different emotions? And then can we actually start to increase and expand our emotional language, our emotional awareness? Like check in with yourself. Another thing we can do is sometimes take a breath, put your hands on your heart if it's appropriate in the moment, and just like, how am I actually feeling? Sometimes I'll close my eyes and just ask myself, how am I feeling? What's happening right now, right? Emotional intelligence is about self awareness and some level of self management. So, again, I'm not saying you have to share all of your emotions with everyone all the time. By the way, talking about our emotions is different than actually feeling them. So, talking about them is important, but it's different than feeling them. Feeling them is an inside job. But the other part of emotional intelligence is social awareness. What are other people feeling? I can't feel what you're feeling, but can I sense what your emotional state might be, what's going on with you? And then relationship management to some degree, like, am I navigating? Am I reading the room? Am I navigating? But all of that is predicated first and foremost on our own self awareness. And then here are a couple specific techniques that I have used over the years that really help me feel my feelings. And yes, sometimes there's story involved in this, but the story is used as a catalyst to get into the feeling. One thing that you can do is something that my counselor Chris taught me years ago, which is write an anger letter. If you're feeling angry, that's a specific emotion that many of us experience that we often don't like and have judgments about and don't want to walk around in life being angry all the time. But if you're angry about something or a bunch of things, you can actually write a letter. Now, the letter itself is going to be the story. Yes. What are you angry about? I'm angry at this. I'm angry at that. Maybe it's to a specific person. Maybe it's to, you know, someone that you don't know, but, you know, someone, a public person. Maybe it's to God. Maybe it's just a rant about all the things you're angry about. Now, yes, a lot of that is story, but the idea in writing the anger letter is actually get into the feeling of anger while you're writing it. And it's not to make you more angry, although it will often intensify the experience. But what I often do is I'll write down all the things I'm angry about, or if I'm angry at a specific person or a situation. Again, yes, this is the story, but I'm trying to actually access the anger and get it out because it's really not about the person. It's not about the story. It's about me. The anger is coming from inside of me. You can do this with fear as well. But if you write an anger letter or a fear letter, the idea, what I often do is write it out. And Chris taught me this years ago. I'll write it out, feel really, get it all out on paper. I'll read it back to myself. Then I fold it up and I put it away. I'll maybe tuck it into my journal or somewhere safe. I don't want anyone to read it. It's for me. And if there's people's names in there or specific situations, they might get upset, right? But then I'll take it out the next day and read it again. And usually when I read it the second time, the next day, I'm not as angry about the things because there's a process that's dissipating the anger as I put it out there. And then on the third day, I read it a third time. And then I go and I rip it up and I flush it down the toilet as a physical representation of I'm transmuting, transforming this anger. Now, look, it doesn't usually mean that whatever was in the letter is magically transformed and it's not a thing anymore. It's just I'm dealing with my anger that's inside of me. That's my responsibility. Then I actually do a meditative process where I close my eyes and I visualize the anger as like really dark, negative energy that's on me. The way I often see it, and this might sound a little weird, but it's the way I visualize it. It's like seaweed. It's like gunk that's physically on my physical body. But in the meditation, what I see is that I see that stuff being lifted off of me and then sort of put into a dumpster or garbage can or something. Like then that seaweed, that gunk, that darkness is lifted off of me, put into this dumpster, this garbage can, and then set on fire. Now I know this might sound a little strange, but this is often how our subconscious mind works. And then it gets lit on fire in my visualization, in my meditation. And then the darkness turns, like the smoke goes from dark to light. And then what I see in the meditation, what I consciously, deliberately choose is to take that lightness, that smoke, that transformed energy from the anger that's been burned, then I start to visualize, what do I want? Maybe with some of the specific situation relating to the things that I'm angry about, or maybe just in general. But that's a way to tap into the energy of a quote unquote negative emotion and then transform it into something more positive. Now, that's all, quite elaborate, I know, but it doesn't take that long. I mean, writing the letter, reading it for a few days, ripping it up, flushing it down the toilet. The meditation usually 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes tops for me. That's one thing. Another thing you can do in meditation, and again, I've talked about this for years. I even recorded, um, I think I recorded an audio of this a while back. And if I can find it, it's been so long, I'll see if I can put it in the show notes. But embracing our emotions. The way that I recorded this specifically as a meditation was embracing powerlessness. Years ago, I was talking to Eleanor about feeling powerless, or she was saying, it sounds like you're feeling a sense of powerlessness. What would it be to embrace powerlessness? And I immediately was like, that sucks. I don't want to do that. No way. And she was like, that was an interesting reaction. But again, that was one of those emotions like, that's bad. That's weak. Don't be. Why would I ever want to be powerless? Who the hell wants to be powerless? But then Eleanor said to me, just because you feel powerless doesn't mean you are powerless. But if you have more freedom to feel powerlessness, you can take your power back, ironically, from that emotion, but any emotion. And she taught me this technique again. I close my eyes, I do some deep breathing, I go into a meditation. And then the visualization that I do in that meditation is seeing myself laying in a beautiful field of grass, being supported by the earth. And then beneath me, as I'm laying there, the grass, the spot that I'm laying, turns into water. Again, I know this sounds a little strange. Maybe you do visualizations, maybe you don't, but just go with me on this. And then the water beneath me is I'm floating, being fully supported. And then the mantra, the thing that I say to myself is I give myself permission to feel powerless. It could be anger, it could be sadness, it could be hurt, it could be jealousy, it could be shame, it could be regret, it could what any emotion. I give myself permission to feel, fill in the blank, powerless. Just because I feel powerless doesn't mean I am powerless. And I just keep saying that over and over again as I'm feeling it. Allow myself to feel the feeling, but remind myself I can feel sad and not be sad. I can feel scared and not be scared. I can feel powerless and not be powerless. Does that make sense? That distinction between feeling and being. We often say, I am angry. That's a state of being. If there's a difference when we say, I feel angry, I am tired versus I feel tired. It's subtle but significant. We remind ourselves, again, if we turn it into a state of being, if the state of being is fear or sadness or anger, that can be problematic. If I'm walking around in a state of being of anger versus I'm giving myself permission to feel this anger intensely so I can really feel it, move through it, transform it, and then move forward in how I want to move forward. Think of the freedom of that. Then we're not afraid of all of our feelings. Then we're not suppressing them and muting them and managing them in some way. We're just feeling them. And look, I live in the real world too. I got to move around in life and be around people. And I'm a dad and I'm a business owner and I speak and I write and I'm married to Michelle and I'm, in and out of Starbucks and airports and places. And like, it's not always conducive for me to just in the middle of the airport, like feel my anger. Although really like I could just in a moment close my eyes, put my hands on my heart and just really feel the anger intensely without doing anything with it. I don't have to scream and yell and tell everybody that I'm feeling pissed off. I could just breathe into it, breathe through it, feel it, and move through it. If you're really sensitive like I am, if you're an emotional person like I am, this is super important. But even if you don't consider yourself all that sensitive or all that emotional, most of us, I think, would like to have a deeper capacity to really feel our emotions. Less fear, less denial, less avoidance of the ones we find hard, and more access and more capacity to really passionately experience and feel the ones that we enjoy, right? This is our access point to it. Feeling our feelings, dropping the story, not getting so attached to all the details and all the circumstances and all the he said this and she said that. And again, I'm not saying the stories aren't important. I'm just saying that that's actually not the reason that we feel what we feel. It's our job to feel those feelings. And if we do, when we do, there's so much that becomes available for us, so much freedom, so much power, so much ability to act, to let go of things, to connect with other humans, to be as healthy as possible. Look, a lot of things that we ultimately experience in our physical bodies start with thoughts and ultimately have a lot to do with our feelings, mostly not feeling those feelings. So having a lot of emotional capacity and emotional space is incredibly important for not only our mental health, but our physical health. So thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. I appreciate it. As always, I have some links in the show notes where you can connect with me and learn more about my work. I'll try to put a link also to the Brene Brown book that I referenced, as well as the meditation that I talked about, if I can find that. Make sure you hit the follow or the subscribe button on whatever platform you're watching or listening to this on. Always appreciate that. And if you want to learn more about me and my work, best place to do that is at our website, which is mike-robbins.com. Until next time, keep bringing your whole self to work, to life, and remember, we're all in this thing together.